Well, having gone slightly over time in the first hour, I'll probably go slightly under time in the second hour. Still continuing with Tiberius, though, so I'm slightly didn't quite get everything sorted out for this class, quite obviously. I want to make the point that although you've got this Hellenistic Baroque type of sculpture, which is clearly very much favoured by Tiberius, and again I stress the point that Tiberius did spend a lot of time on the island of Rhodes. So you can see that he would have probably got the idea there, he would have seen sculpture there, started collecting things there. But this idea of Hellenistic Baroque doesn't really take off with the Roman people so much. We've got some quite good evidence for this in this relief. It's known as the Suva Taurilia relief, found at the found in Rome, now in the Louvre Museum. Now, unfortunately, we know we've only got one part of what must have been two sections of a marble relief. On the part that survives, you've got an altar with a laurel tree behind it, and over here is another altar, and we've got another laurel tree, Daphne tree, behind it. There's one place at Rome was characterized by having two laurel trees outside it, and that was the house of Augustus. He was given two trees by decree of the Roman Senate. So, you know, we can see, generally speaking, that this is a scene of something taking place outside the house of Augustus, or close to the house of Augustus. Now, unfortunately, the face on this person here has been restored. But you can see that this person is velatus, veiled, with the toga over the head to indicate that this is a Roman citizen performing a duty as a priest, for which he would have to be velatus, and you can also see he's barefooted, again a traditional feature of a priest. We don't know who this is because the face has been restored. It's clearly part of a general sacrifice scene, su ve taurilia, so you've got the cow, or the pig, the ram and the bull here. And these guys are holding staffs, they're holding long sticks, so they have to be lictors. So it's an imperial scene, or a consul scene. The only problem is this, of course. Two altars, two people making a sacrifice. This allows us to suggest a probable date for this particular relief. There was only one time when two Roman magistrates, imperial magistrates, emperors, would share, or an emperor would share in a sacrifice, and that was after a census. We know that Augustus, just before he died, and Tiberius did take part in a census ceremony, so this is probably what this represents. In other words, we can probably date this to AD 14, just before the death of Augustus himself. But you can see there's absolutely nothing Hellenistic at all about this. It fits in with the same sort of pattern of art we see on the Ara Pacis Augusta. You've got a sense of perspective is given by showing people in the background. They're partly covered there. Notice, of course, that you don't see their feet, because that would be a giveaway. That would make them look, you know, sort of 3 meters tall, as opposed to everybody else being 2 meters tall. So, and there's a general space between them. The heads are more or less the same size, except, of course, for the guy here who's leaning over with the pig at the front of the sacrifice. So, although we've got this very clear case at the Villa Sperlonga of what is Tiberius's love of Hellenistic Baroque and Hellenistic Baroque type art coming into fashion in Roman Italy. In the rest of Italy, Rome itself, purely Roman tradition in art continues. Well, Tiberius's own son Drusus and his nephew Germanicus both died while he was princeps. And so after his own death in AD 37, the Praetorian Guard and the Senate agreed to make Gaius the new ruler. Gaius is the great-great-grandson of Augustus. He's Tiberius's great-nephew. He's a Claudius, basically, but he's now in the Julian family. We know him best as Caligula, which means little boots, because when he was growing up, he used to have a little soldier's uniform, and he used to go with his dad on military campaigns, so everybody called him Little Boots Caligula. Just as before, what we find happening with the new portraits of the period, the emphasis is on indicating some kind of relationship between this emperor and the predecessor. But I put this one on because I want you always to remember that Roman statues were painted. We see them now like this. This was the fashion that developed when classical statues began to be appreciated in the 18th century. But they were always originally painted. An analysis of the paint traces on this one tells us that Gaius Caligula has got these rather brown eyes, brownish hair, and darker skin complexion. But again, you see, it's the hairstyles. The broad shape of the face, the broad shape of the eyes, those very prominent Claudian ears. Oh, you can pick them up by the ears with a Claudius. They're so similar to Tiberius over there, Gaius over here. The hairstyles is what tells them apart. So that's how you get to know them. Well, Gaius Caligula became princeps when he was 25 or so, I think it was. But he suffered some form of severe mental breakdown in the year 38 or 39. His behaviour became very erratic. Nobody knew what he was going to do next. And the result was that he was murdered by the Praetorian Guard, with the agreement of the Senate almost certainly, in the year 41. Well, only ruler for 4 years, we can't really say much about any buildings he did. He started 2 aqueducts, but they were finished by the next emperor, Claudius. So we can't really say very much about the architecture and art of that period. So this guy comes in as Emperor Claudius, Tiberius Claudius Nero, but we call this one Claudius, as opposed to Tiberius Claudius Nero, who we call Tiberius, as opposed to Tiberius Claudius Nero, that we call Nero. All right, they've all got the same name, all right? Claudius. Claudius becomes emperor in the year 41, remains as emperor until the year 54. And again, we find this attempt being made to link through official portraits the new emperor with the predecessor. Except, of course, nobody wants to hint a relationship between Claudius and Caligula, who is a bit crazy. He's Caligula's uncle, by the way. So here we've got the young Tiberius on the one side, and we've got the young Claudius as princeps on the other side. Again, it's the hairstyles. It's the hairstyles that really give you this impression that these people are somehow related, the hairstyles and the ears. Like most Roman emperors, Claudius was very much aware of the need to keep the people of Rome happy. His principal piece of architecture at Rome was to complete the 2 aqueducts started by Gaius Caligula. One of these was a completely new one, the Aqua Claudia. The other, which brought a rather dirty water to Rome for industrial purposes. The other was a new aqueduct called the Aqua Nova. It's a new aqueduct from replacing an existing one. These were brought to Rome, and for the last 7 kilometers or so, they go across the valley on a series of arches like this, forming a bridge aqueduct. What's fascinating about these is, of course, that as they get closer to Rome, they're joined together, so you have the Aqua Nova, clean drinking water, in a brick-built channel running over the top of the Aqua Claudia, which has got a rather soapy type water used for industrial purposes. So you've got the 2 separate channels there. Looking at this stretch of the aqueduct, I want you to notice this. This style of masonry we call rusticated masonry, in which the surface of the stone is deliberately left rough. Well, you might think this is simply done for reasons of economy. It saves a lot of money if you just cut out a piece of stone in a rough shape. You have to cut the edges, the top and the bottom straight, but why waste time trying to make the face of it look straight? But the interesting thing we find, as the aqueduct enters Rome, it's carried into Rome on a massive gateway now known as the Porta Maggiore, at a point where it crosses two roads, just meeting at a fork like that. So you've got these two massive archways with smaller archways at a lower level, now buried beneath the ground. Sorry, one of them there, to give access for pedestrians and wheeled traffic. This arch is deliberately built in the rusticated style. We can only assume that Claudius wanted it to be built like this, or the architect wanted it to be built like this and convinced Claudius it should be built like this. You can see the top part of the aqueduct. Now that's the Aqua Nova behind there, the Aqua Claudia behind here. It had an inscription on it recording that it was built by the Emperor Claudius. It was repaired by Vespasian, so you've got another inscription there, and repaired one more time by the Emperor Titus, so one more inscription. But look at the stonework. The stonework is deliberately left rusticated. You're left with the little blocks on the end of the column pieces there used for lifting the stone into position. They've carefully finished off this pediment. They've finished off the top of the arch like that, but basically it looks like a piece of unfinished masonry. Now there's absolutely no reason why this should not have been finished and completed as a smooth piece of stonework. We know that Claudius was basically a historian. He never wanted to be emperor. He was interested in anything that was old. And it's thought that Claudius specifically chose this style to try and give an impression of old buildings in the landscape. The rusticated masonry in the aqueduct bridge we can understand and accept as being an economy measure. Why waste money cleaning it off? But this is one of the main entrances to Rome. The top part of the Porta Maggiore, beautifully cleaned off travertine stonework, carries the inscription. You can see the details have started to be added of the Corinthian columns, but they've never been finished. And the stonework on the rest of the gateway has never ever been cut back. So the Porta Maggiore is quite interesting from that point of view. It seems to indicate Claudius's own interest in a particular architectural style. Well, Claudius, like his predecessors, was quite happy to use art as propaganda, and we see this fairly clearly in this series of reliefs, which for a long time were thought to be from the Ara Pietatis Augusti, let me check my ending there, Augusti. And I think the textbook says that's what it comes from. If you read the textbook beforehand, you could have said, "Excuse me, sir, that's not what it says in the textbook." All right, well, now I'm going to explain why I'm giving it a different name. These two bits of relief were found in Rome. We know where they were found in the 18th century. We know nothing more about the monument, but it's clearly from an altar-type monument. We know that Tiberius, when Livia died, said he would build an altar in her memory and Augustus' memory, the Ara Pietatis Augusti. There is no evidence he actually did. What we do know is that Claudius, in the year AD 43, built an altar to the Julian family, the altar of the Julian family. AD 43 was when Livia was deified. It was announced that she was godlike. She'd already been dead 20 odd years, but now it's officially said that she's godlike, just like Augustus. How we can identify these reliefs as probably coming from the Ara Gentis Julia rather than the Ara Pietatis Augusti is basically from the scenes that we have represented on them. Typical Roman fashion. They show us in great detail a historical event. We have clearly a procession of senators and other important people wearing laurel wreaths, their very heavy togas, very characteristic of the Augustan and Julio-Claudian period. They're leading a procession with a bull, which has got that triangular hat on, ready for the sacrifice. These two men are bare-chested, so these are the guys who will do the sacrifice. These are the victim arii, victimarius. This is a temple. Now, the Romans don't quite have the grasp of perspective fully, so we're looking at a rather composite view, a rather complicated composite view at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tetras, well, actually originally 6. It's got to be 6 going over there. 6 columns originally. A hexastyle temple. Stairs at the front. Wide doorway. Corinthian order. We see the side of the temple going back like that. So you've got this very odd view of it stretched out. We have aquitaria. This aquitaria is of a female dancer. The pediment scene shows us a chair with a crown on it. 2 women lean against it and they've got tambourines into their arms. This combination of imagery tells us that this is the temple of Cybele, or the temple of Magna Mater, a hexastyle temple on the Palatine, next door to the house of Augustus and the house of Livia. The next part of the scene, or the next relief that we have from this, to a few of the fragments, shows the actual sacrifice scene taking place. You can see the bull's head is now being bent forward, ready to be hit, to be stunned, and for his throat to be cut. You've got consuls or other people standing in the background there. He's holding what seems to be a fasces or a book. It's not entirely clear. But what have we got here? Another temple scene. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 actual columns across the front here, although we've only got the 7 showing there. Because again, the artists are trying to show it all in perspective. But you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 before we get to the midpoint. It has to be octastyle, just like the other one has to be hexastyle. 4 columns before the midway point. Meant to be an octastyle temple. In the pediment, we have a series of figures that we can identify as being on the Temple of Mars altar. So we've got Mars in the centre, we've got Roma to one side, we've got Venus, we've got Fortuna, the spirit of the Campus Martius, the spirit of the River Tiber, so this has to be the Temple of Mars altar. These reliefs tell us that this altar, the frieze shows us a procession. It's just like the Ara Pacis Augusti, with the 2 processions on either side. This procession, a sacrificial procession, which started at or went past the Temple of Cybele, next door to the house of Augustus and Livia, ends in the Forum of Augustus, in front of the Temple of Mars altar. These things tied together to indicate that this is most probably the Ara Gentis Julii, the Claudian altar to the Julian family, when Livia was deified in the year 43. It's a fascinating relief. We just wish that we had much more of it. And of course it's interesting to compare this, as the textbook does, not directly, with the relief of the Vico Magistri. Now you never ever see a photograph of the front of the relief of the Vico Magistri, and this is why. It sits in a museum in a corridor like that, and you can't really get a photograph of it. There's a column in the way there. But this is the altar of the Vico Magistri here, so we'll look at the two sections of this as they are. The Vico Magistri. These are the local officials, magister, singular. These are the guys who are in charge of a vicus, a neighbourhood, an area of Rome. Vico Magistri, plural. We can recognise this as being a procession of Vico Magistri essentially by these figures here. These are the Vico Magistri themselves, this group of people walking along in procession, all with their togas on. It's a formal event, some with laurel wreaths on their head as well. In front of them you've got four figures who are not wearing togas, they are wearing tunics. This suggests that they may be young people, or, which they don't look like, or they are freedmen. They are ex-slaves. They haven't got full Roman citizen status. They're all, three of them are holding something in their left hand. In each case you can see the square base of what has to be a small statue. What a statue survives there, another one survives there. The one at the front may have been holding a statue. It's not at all clear what he's holding. You can see that not only do they have tunics on, they don't have shoes, they're about to take part in a sacrifice, and they have a cloak pulled up over their heads. They are velatus, they are veiled. Well, we know that in Roman everyday life, periodically there would be a procession by the Vico Magistri, the local area officials, to celebrate an important imperial occasion, the birth of a child, a new emperor or something like that. At a time like that, they would take with them on procession small statues of the lares, the household gods, and small statues of the genii, the genius, the spirit of the imperial person. So we can identify this as what's happening here. It's some procession by the Vico Magistri in which the lares and the statue of the genius of the emperor are being taken out to celebrate some form of imperial event. The next section, that's the join line there. The next section shows you the animals which are being led in for the sacrifice, and you've got the trumpeters here, various other people. It's quite clear from the way it goes round a corner at both ends that this is part of an altar enclosure, or it's the top of an altar. Notice, incidentally, again, it's this attempt to show perspective by having figures in the background shown at a higher level. But see where the problem comes? Look how tall that man is. All right? I haven't quite got the idea of perspective fully. Really, his feet would be there. But the guy making this realised if I show him with his feet halfway up, it will look as if he's floating somehow, you know. I mean, so they don't quite know what to do. In other places, he gets around the problem by not showing any feet at all. Well, you can see that the overall idea for something like this, it has to be a private piece of work. It's not an imperial piece of work. It's not a fantastic piece of art. Incidentally, oh yes, you can also see that one there. Look, his feet are right down there. It's something that a group of magistri probably got together and paid to celebrate some specific occasion. What that occasion was, we don't know. We can't be certain it's from the time of Claudius. The general hairstyles this Julio-Claudian hairstyle. There's nothing specific in their hairstyles. Authorities on the art of the Roman period assure us that this is Claudian and no earlier or no later, just broadly speaking Julio-Claudian. You can see, of course, this idea of showing the figures higher in the background, overlapping figures. All this comes from the Ara Pacis Augusti. Now the Ara of Pacis Augusti, probably made by Greek artists. This almost certainly made by Roman artists in this particular style. Well, we don't know what this is celebrating. We can think of some occasions if it is Claudius, a most obvious one, for example, when he becomes emperor. Well, at the time Claudius became emperor, he was on his third wife, a lady called Messalina. He had a son the same year he became emperor, a son who's called Tiberius Claudius Nero, until he becomes emperor. Then it becomes, yeah, you've got it, you've got the message, Tiberius Claudius Caesar. Messalina is his second cousin. Their parents are cousins, their grandparents are brothers and sisters, right? So they're fairly closely married. A distant relative of Augustus as well, a grandniece of Augustus. Well, she gives birth in the year 41 to this little boy who's called Claudius. He's later given the name Britannicus. In the year 43, Claudius invaded Britain, captured the island of Britain, so Tiberius Claudius Caesar was renamed Britannicus in honour of that particular conquest. 5 years later, in the year 48, Messalina, who had a little bit of a reputation, was discovered to be having an affair with one of the prominent Roman politicians of the day, a man called Gaius Silius. Well, if I can make a really bad pun joke, it's a silly thing to do to have an affair with the wife of a Roman emperor, because yes, if you get found out, that's it. So Messalina is executed, so is Gaius Silius. Poor old Claudius, he's had 3 wives, he said, that's it, I'm not having any more, I've had enough of women. Right? He had a reputation of the women could easily manage him and sort of tell him what to do. And this is said of Messalina and his other wives as well. But his advisor eventually convinced him that, yes, you know, an emperor should be married and blah, 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 and perhaps you ought to have another son just in case you get run over by a tram while you're out walking or something happens to little Britannicus. So 1 year after Messalina is executed, in 49, he marries his 4th wife, Agrippina. She's the sister of Gaius Caligula, one of the 3 sisters of Gaius Caligula's, one of the ex-mistresses of Gaius Caligula. This is Claudius's niece. I think they're all very closely related. Well, at the time of the marriage, her husband had died a few years before. She already had a son who had the name of Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. You remember the altar of Domitius Ahenobarbus? It's the same family. What Romans do is they repeat the name for the older son all the way down the line. If you have a second son, then the third name is different. So he's 14 years old at this time. And she gets married to Claudius, and exactly 1 year later, she convinces Claudius to adopt this young boy as his own son. So he takes the name Tiberius Claudius Nero, Well, at this time, and what we have to bear in mind is, of course, that he's 15 years old, Britannicus is about 13 years old. This is an adoption period portrait of Nero. Same hairstyle, same generalized Julio-Claudian Augustan face, hinting at a family relationship that doesn't exist, big ears sticking out like that. 4 years later, Claudius is dead. Now the story is that Agrippina comes in one night and says, "Here you are, honey. I picked you some mushrooms. I know you like mushrooms. These are special mushrooms that I've found in the woods for you today. Carefully cleaned with my own fair hands and cooked them just for you." Ooh, he's dead. We don't know if there's any truth in that story or not. It seems rather unlikely. It's possible, but it seems unlikely because we know that Agrippina, the year after Claudius died, started building a temple in his memory. Parts of the temple still survive, the temple of Claudius, and look at the style of stonework. Yes, it's that rusticated masonry stonework that we see in the Porta Maggiore. So, you know, again, this kind of supports the idea that Claudius was rather keen on this particular style. So Nero, now 18 years old, and Britannicus, 13 to 14 years old, are declared joint emperors, but then Britannicus mysteriously dies. Oh, poor Britannicus, leaving Nero as princeps. Here we are, Nero. Second most famous or infamous of the Roman emperors after Gaius Caligula. This is a portrait bust made of him at the time he became princeps. Still got that long hair down the back of his neck, characteristic of a youth below the age of 21. And as Ramage and Ramage make the point, with Nero we see a changeover from the idealism of imperial portraits to go back to a more verist approach. Nero, when adopted, classic Julio Claudian imagery. You can put that face in with the others, Gaius, Lucius, Germanicus, Tiberius, who you want. You know, you can work out who's who from their hairstyle. This is Nero when emperor. Shows him quite realistically. When we look at his coins, brutally verist. Now, he's the emperor. He has to approve what his image looks like on the coin. So he totally agrees with this particular image. And this image actually does match the descriptions we have of Nero as being a rather sort of chubby person with a little snub nose like that. His hair combed forward, not so much in the Julio Claudian style, but to cover up the fact he was going bald at the front. So it's a very verist portrait that we have of Nero in this particular case, with that very deep chin there. So Nero, going back to this kind of verism, Ramage and Ramage suggest in the textbook that he's trying to look like Alexander, he's trying to get an Anastola type hairstyle. Well, this is where I completely differ with the textbook. Here's Alexander. Well, yeah, you got the curls there, but the Anastola goes up in the air. Pompey the Great, classic Anastola. I don't really see an Anastola in any portraits of Nero. I think I'm going to stop there because otherwise I know I will go over time. So we'll finish a little bit early. Okay, how early have we finished?